Hi, everyone. My name is Tanya McKenzie. I am the chair of the Economic Development Committee for the Redondo Beach Chamber of Commerce. I'm here today out of the abundance of care and concern that we have for our businesses and their workplace. We know that COVID has been incredibly invasive in our workplace, and how we navigate things with our employees, with our customers and our clients, all of the things are hugely important. And we want to make sure that we are bringing you the most up-to-date information from those of us that work out with the people. So we want to get started, introduce you to some of our panelists, some of our board members and community businesses, so that they can talk to you about how they are handling COVID in the workplace today. Let's go ahead and get started with our introductions. With you, Larry.
I did the mute thing. Hi, my name is Larry Halverson with Express Employment Professionals. I am on the board of directors, the incoming chair for next year, and I own an employment agency here in the South Bay. So I'm here to talk about my practical experiences and the experiences of my clients. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Veronica.
My name is Veronica Mandujano. I work for South Bay Workforce Investment Board, and I am the safety coordinator.
Awesome. Miss Lisa?
Thank you, Tanya. I'm Lisa Von Eschen. I'm with the Maloney firm, together with my colleague, Nicholas Grether. And we represent employers. And through this time of COVID, a lot of what we've been doing is keeping them up to date and trying to keep them compliant with all of the regulations. So we'll be talking about those today.
Great, thank you. Nicholas?
Yes, Nicholas Grether, attorney at the Maloney firm, working with Lisa, and yeah, just present a few ideas and some legal requirements that businesses here need to know. Thanks.
Awesome. Don?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Don Ford, and I am a human resource management consultant. I own a business called Training Education Management. I'm also a member of the Economic Development Council of the Chamber, and we'll share some information from a human resource perspective today.
Awesome. So now that you've all been introduced to our panel, we're going to take some time to delve a little deeper into how they are dealing with COVID in the workplace. We're starting with our up to 10-minute presentations with each person, and we'll definitely have time for question and answer when we're done. So take notes. It's going to be great information for you to take back to your workplace, your employees, and your customers. Let's go ahead and get started with Veronica.
Well, I spoke to Lisa earlier today, and we covered kind of some information on how I would be answering more of the Q&A portion of it. So I'll just go ahead and hand it over to Lisa, and then I'll step in when necessary.
Great.
Okay. And obviously, if we're going through things with our presentation, Veronica, and you want to jump in at that time, we could definitely do that. So I think, great, Nick has the ability to share our PowerPoint. So we have a larger PowerPoint actually that, given the time constraints, we're not going to use, but that we can provide to everyone if it would give you extra resources. And this is basically our summary of some of the rules, applicable rules that we have to navigating COVID-19 right now. So I think I'm going to have Nick start, and then I'm going to cover some of the other matters.
All right, yeah, so the first thing to remember, and you're all likely well versed in this, but you know, to know that there's several different authorities that are providing rules. You know, there's the federal government, rules from the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration, as well as the CDC. Then there are your state authorities. California is a planned state, so it has its own OSHA. And so it's required to, you know, have its own workplace rules. And then there's also the California Department of Public Health. And then, as you know, here in Redondo Beach, there's the local ordinances from LA County. Of course, Redondo Beach, the city itself, could make rules if it wished to. But the important thing is to know that there's these various different levels, and that you have to comply with the most strict or the most, the strictest standards. So if LA County says, like it does, you got to wear masks in all indoor settings for public indoor settings, then that's what you got to do, even if say the California Department of Public Health doesn't require that, or Cal OSHA doesn't require that. So there's guidance from the Los Angeles County on face coverings and respirators, and what to provide to your customers and your employees in that respect. And what they require you to do is that all patrons and employees, and now regardless of their vaccination status, is to wear masks in all of the indoor settings. So if you're working in an office environment, or if you're at a restaurant or a movie theater, anything like that, you have to wear a mask. You also have to post clear, visible signage at all entry points, so that the masking requirements are communicated. Because what you don't want to do is have your customers confused if they try to walk in and say, "Oh, well, I didn't see that there was a masking requirement here." You want to make that clear up front. And then additionally, you want to provide masks to your employees if they need them, because if they're required to come to work and they can't work from home, that is technically a business expense that you would have to reimburse them for. Of course, if they want to wear their own mask, no problem. And then LA County, I'm sure everybody's well versed in this if you run one of these types of businesses, but as of November, they're requiring all patrons of certain businesses like bars, breweries, wineries, and distilleries. Anyone who shows up who's 12 years of age or older, I think probably, in reality, probably 21 years of age or older for most of those people. But if you do show up, you have to provide your proof of your COVID vaccination, much in the same way as you will seek proof of vaccination from an employee. You will want to see a copy of their card, or like a picture of their card, or the digital health record, which you can put into like an Apple Wallet or something like that. And then additionally, if there's outdoor services, say a bar has an outdoor service, you can provide that for people who cannot provide proof of vaccination. So either they're unvaccinated, or they just don't have their card with them. If you have that outdoor service, you can provide that as well. But then if they are to come inside, you do have to require to see that proof of vaccination as well. We put in a little information about this. This has kind of been slowed, the mandate from President Biden and the federal government about employers with over 100 employees requiring their employees to be vaccinated. However, this is a moving target. We'll see if the courts allow this to ever take effect, or if it takes effect in some sort of modified way. And as I was talking about earlier, with California being a plan state, they will have to take these federal standards and then create their own standards, which are at least as protective. So the official rules that we'll be following here in California will actually be coming from Cal OSHA, and they'll have a certain deadline to comply once the various legal battles and all these things get sorted out. And that'll require either vaccination or weekly testing if this version of it ends up being passed. And then for vaccination verification policies, remember this should be a private, confidential process. And you don't want to discriminate against people based on vaccination status, for their health inequities, and you don't want to create any barriers to essential services based on that protected characteristic. So the important thing is, have clear written policies that communicate that to your employees, and include that in your COVID-19 prevention plans as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Thanks, Nick. On that COVID-19 prevention plan, that is something that the California ETS put in place for employers to have, and basically before you have people back at work in this land of COVID, you're supposed to have a document that communicates to them these are the resources available if you get sick, here are our rules, here's what we do if someone's sick. And there's a sample on the DFEH website that we can also provide in the linked materials of getting that all in one place. And it's a good document for training too, because employers are required to do training, which I think Don might touch on as well. One of the things Nick was saying was this is a moving target. All of this stuff is a moving target, unfortunately. Yeah. We've been doing these types of training for, about a year and a half now to just kind of help people navigate what's required. And with respect to like the bars and restaurants rules that come in from the county, LA City put in something stricter. Redondo hasn't, or none of the South Bay cities have yet, but we just really don't know at this point. And as someone mentioned when we were getting ready for the call this morning, now we have the Omicron variant, right? So we just have to continue to just do our best to comply with these rules and understand them. Under Cal OSHA guidance right now, there are testing requirements only if, so they've changed. It used to be that you were required to provide testing available to anyone, but now not if they're asymptomatic and fully vaxxed, or if they had COVID and recovered and came back to work pursuant to the requirements. But if we have unvaccinated employees who are sick, or there's a known exposure, then you might have to provide testing time. As a practical matter, I've had clients that have asked me about people who need testing, and I've just said, if you can, just have them tested on paid time. It's just easier. You want them to get tested, but if you're a larger employer, that can be, somewhat more difficult to do. One thing I get a ton of questions from my clients as an employment lawyer about is accommodations. So with respect to vaccines, even if currently there isn't a requirement for employers to put in vaccines, while that Biden legislation is held up for larger employers or for those smaller employers who are not subject to the rules, I am seeing a lot of clients who are putting vaccine requirements in place. It's giving their employees some comfort level as far as coming back to work. And if it's something that an employer or business chooses to do, then they also need to provide accommodations if people request them. And there's two bases on which they can seek them. One is a disability reason. They have a health reason that they can't take the vaccine. The other is a sincerely held religious belief. We aren't in California allowed to really dig into what that sincerely held religious belief is. But if someone asks for an accommodation not to have to be vaccinated, then the employer needs to look into balancing the interests and how to handle it. So maybe that one person could continue to work from home. Maybe they sit at one end of the office, or there's split shifts. They certainly would continue to, wear a mask even once the masking mandate in LA County changes, that type of thing. And you need to kind of, again, be flexible, but use standards that would apply across your workforce if this were to come up. Once someone requests an accommodation, then you need to do what's called engage in the good faith interactive process. So you basically need to sit down with the employee, hear their request, and then evaluate if it is something you can do, or if it would pose an undue burden on the employer. Say they were to say, I need to not come back at all in person, but your whole workforce is in person and you're in a public serving the public type of an environment, that might not work. You can't be a cashier somewhere from home, that type of thing. Then you would negotiate whether there were other accommodations that would meet the person's needs that you could do. If someone just says, I don't want to get the vaccine because I'm afraid, that isn't a request for an accommodation that you need to do. But I have had some clients that have decided to do that have let people choose and implemented testing options. As long as you're doing things across the board, that is something that you could make a choice to do, but you don't have to. Another thing employers in COVID are required to do is symptom screening. So you just want to, and this is part of your COVID prevention plan, you want to have something in place that allows you to do these screenings. most commonly, employers are asking employees to self-monitor at home. And part of that plan says, don't come to work if you have symptoms or if you know you've been exposed. Others are using maybe online screening tools or apps. I know, like when I take my daughter to school in the morning, every morning she has to do the green screen to make sure that she asserts that she's not ill and hasn't knowingly been exposed. Those types of things, depending on the size of your workforce, can work, but you need to have something in place, even if it's just having the people attest that they are monitoring this. And then other things that you can do to reduce risk is we aren't legally required in Los Angeles County to social distance anymore, but many people are still doing that. And I think Veronica might talk about some of how she put that into place where she is. Employers are, though, required to evaluate their building's ventilation systems. And I have lots of clients that are having very outdated HVAC systems opened before they have their employees come back, or looking into HEPA filters and that type of thing in offices. And then finally, on excluding people, we do need to exclude people who have had a close contact unless they're fully vaccinated and they don't have symptoms or they've just recovered from COVID. But for the most part, again, lots of employers are telling people once you've been exposed, we'll work with you to not be in our office and cause ripples. Last requirement that we wanted to make sure to include, and we're trying to just hit the highlights, and we'll obviously have time for questions once everyone's done, is notice. If people are exposed at the work site, there is a California statute in place that says that you must give written notice to your employees. You also have to provide a verbal notice that is understandable by the employee in their language if you have reason to know that they wouldn't understand the written notice due to literacy concerns. And you have to do it within 1 business day. So it's really short. And a lot of our clients who have been operating through the pandemic had that notice prepared just in case, so that it's ready to go in the event that something like that were to happen. And that's what we have, but we're happy to, once the presentations are done, cover more.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Remember, keep your questions handy. We will definitely get back to all of them. Veronica, did you have anything that you wanted to add to Lisa and Nicholas' presentation at this time?
Yes. So a part of what we decided to do at the South Bay was obviously put up plexiglass, provide each department with portable filters, and not rely only on the filter system through the the buildings. We also have a school, so we had to make sure that all of our classrooms had filters, and we supplied every staff member and participant in the schools with a reusable face mask, a kit, sort of say a kit, a portable kit for each one, with hand sanitizers, wipes if necessary, gloves, and reusable face mask. I ensure that we need to have everyone sign off. I know it's a lot of work for the employer, but we do have everyone sign off so that, you know, we kind of keep track of what items are being handed out to staff and when we need to replenish for them. There was a mention about putting signage for face covering or face mask. It's important that we put multiple language signs displayed, because depending on what you're catering to, whether it's the public or staff that speak multiple languages. We have had the LA Department of Public Health come in, and thankfully we were equipped with all the information, but they do seek out that sort of verbiage on displayed. In terms of social distance, we still practice the social distance throughout all of our centers. And we no longer have it notated on the floor in some areas, just because we have people who can monitor that. And I think at this time, oh, I did have something to add. So one of the concerns that I think we'll probably see down the line is if we cater to the public, and let's say we have someone that's a repeat customer and they come in and they show us their vaccination card. Obviously, we're not keeping record of that. But then they come in, 3 days later or a week later, and they say, we already showed it to you. They don't have it again. Nonetheless, we have perhaps different staff in the front that didn't see it the first time. So how can we talk a little bit about that, how to handle situations like that?
Definitely. So we will, let's keep that on the back burner and get right into that. That'll be our first open conversation right after we get to Dawn. So let's hear what you have to share with us today, Mr. Ford.
All right. Well, thank you very much. As I mentioned, I am a human resource management consultant. So I'm going to just briefly address this from the HR side. Human resources typically gets to handle all the people side of this operation. We don't make the policies, but we get to enforce and carry them out. So again, as I introduced earlier, I provide consulting services to a lot of different companies, both locally as well as nationally. I'm dealing with clients even internationally in some cases. And so what we're finding is everybody is struggling basically with this same issue. What kind of policy should we put in place? How do we enforce it? How do we ensure people are safe and yet still continue to operate the business and stay in business? So I do want to first start by sharing a couple of great resources. Already Lisa and Nicholas have talked about OSHA. They have published a variety of different guidance documents. And so if you haven't seen those, I would greatly recommend starting there. As they've indicated, OSHA kind of has ultimate authority over health and safety issues here in California. In addition, I do want to also recommend the Society for Human Resource Management, otherwise known as SHRM. They are the largest organization of professional HR people in the world. And they have taken a pretty proactive role in producing guidance documents, including one called Return to Work. And I would encourage you to check that out. Now, as a membership site, many of their resources are for members only, but as a public service, they have made some COVID related information available. But I'm going to summarize it all for you in 3 easy bullets here for those of you that don't want to read through hundreds of pages. Basically, both of these organizations are essentially urging employers to do 3 things. First, create a policy to govern COVID in the workplace. OSHA has indicated requires you add that to your injury and illness prevention plan. So you want to first of all make sure that plan has been updated with the latest guidance from OSHA. You will also, of course, there's some great guidance you've gotten today from our attorneys on this panel, but in addition, obviously, you also have to consider the individual needs and risks of your own business. So I start with clients by saying, let's do a little risk assessment here. What are the risks that you face? How likely is it that somebody's going to be exposed and could potentially spread COVID? And you start there. And then based on that, what are some common sense things that we can do to try to prevent that? Secondly, both organizations encourage training your employees. It doesn't do any good to have a policy you file away somewhere in a file cabinet and nobody ever sees it until something happens. So make sure that the policy is distributed to employees and also provide some kind of basic training on what the policy says and what you expect your employees to be doing. This could be done very simply through, say, a staff meeting. It could also be done more formally by bringing in some of the experts that you've heard from today and providing a more formal training. But don't just leave it to, mailing out, emailing a policy and let it go at that. You need to talk to employees face to face and ensure they understand the policy and that they're on board with it, right? And then obviously the third point, and this is the hard part, is how do I enforce the policy fairly? So when somebody asks for an exception to the policy, when somebody claims they have a right that you didn't even think about, how are you going to handle that? And are you going to do it in a way that ensures that people are being treated fairly and equitably? If you start carving out exceptions for your favorite employees, you're going to create a mess within your work environment in which people are going to lose confidence and lose trust in your ability to operate a safe workplace. And guess what? That's when they don't want to show up to work, if they don't think that they can go to a safe place to work, right? So in terms of the challenges, we all know the bottom line, we're trying to keep employees safe. We're trying to keep our customers safe. None of us want to send somebody home with COVID at the end of the day. And so obviously that means we need to try to stop the spread of this thing. But at the same time, you've got to address people's concerns. And obviously there's been a lot of misinformation as well as good quality information about the COVID pandemic. And so when you're conducting training, give people an opportunity to ask questions, to vent their frustration and feelings, get it out in the open so you can deal with it. Address their concerns. Don't just pretend that nobody has any concerns, because you only have to turn on the TV news to know that that's utter false. That's an utter falsehood. So go ahead and be honest. And obviously the goal here is to sustain your operation, but to do it safely in a way that doesn't further spread this pandemic. So what specifically can you do? Most experts are suggesting a multi-layered approach to safety. No one of these things is a sure, silver bullet. Even vaccination is only about 90% effective. So you're still going to have breakthrough infections. But what the experts are saying is if you put multiple layers of safety in place, then you have a much better chance of keeping COVID out of your workplace. So as you've heard from Veronica, it starts with good hygiene and keeping your workplace clean and healthy, social distancing where possible. If people can work from home, then allow them to do so. In jobs where they can't work from home, at least provide some kind of personal protective equipment and barriers to help keep them safe. When it comes to masking and testing and vaccinating, we have already heard from our legal experts what some of the current legal thinking is around this. Obviously, the best thing is to get people vaccinated. We know that that is, of all of these approaches, that is the most effective. And so you will have to figure out what you want to do. As we've heard, the mandate for vaccination is currently on hold and tied up in the courts. But as an employer, you have to figure out what are you going to do. If people refuse to get vaccinated, will you then require testing so that they can prove that they're COVID-free? Will you exclude them from the workplace and send them home? These are all difficult questions, but I think, again, the important thing is think through all of those possibilities now, get it put together in a policy and be prepared rather than try to deal with these things on an ad hoc basis as they emerge, because all you're going to do is frustrate the heck out of people who don't know why you don't seem to have your act together. So with that, let me just turn it over to Larry, and I'm sure he can tell us a bit more here.
All right, Larry.
Well, I don't have a slide presentation because I just want to talk a little bit about the practical application in the real world, not the rules that many people have touted, and that is the great advice. In the practical application in the real world, it can be challenging. We've had 12 people get COVID at 12 different businesses. So that's our experience, if you would. So that it's probably more varied than others. In every single instance, in 11 instances, they could tell me exactly how they got COVID. In one, they could not. But in all 12, they could 100% confirm they did not get it in the workplace. 100%. And that's because in the workplace, most employers are doing exactly what Dawn and Lisa and Nicole and Veronica just talked about. And that it does work. So almost in every instance, it's at home with a friend or a family member, unmasked, 5 feet, in the same car, in the same room. And that's how they got it. In all 12 instances, none of them got it at work. So that's bad and good news. Obviously, no one wants to get COVID, but the workplace rules do practically work. I mean, the practical application of those rules are working from our observation. So that's good news there. I get a lot of questions around how to, obviously they've already talked about Cal OSHA. I think the one thing that has been mentioned is what do you do when somebody does get COVID? A great resource is to go out to the CDC website. It gives you exact guidance on how to handle it, on what they need to do to get tested, when they can come back to work, whether they got it or they were just exposed. All that is handled right there on the CDC website for employers. I highly recommend those people who are lost when that happens to them, when their employees get COVID, go check that website out. It'll tell you exactly what they need to do and when you can bring them back to work. As far as vaccine mandates go, I would say right now I work with about 200 companies here in the South Bay, 100 at any active time. I'd say about 20% of them right now have a vaccine mandate on their own, which means I can only provide them with people who are vaccinated. Example, one of them is Google, right? Google has a policy. They're trying to open up. They're trying to come back to work, and you got to be vaccinated if you're going to work there, whether you're a vendor or an employee, right? So it is legal to ask that question, by the way, and it is legal to provide documentation. But when it comes to HIPAA, which I don't think we've talked about, but that is probably the number one question I get from employers. What about HIPAA? Well, HIPAA means that if I can tell you my simple example, let me simplify it. I can tell you my employee is vaccinated. What I cannot do is show you his vaccination card, right? That's HIPAA. I'd be releasing his medical information. I can assure you, and I can have a policy where I ask them about it. They can prove it to me because they're my employees, right? But I can't then provide you with that documentation. So that's pretty much the simplified version of how HIPAA doesn't really get in the way here, as long as you're not requiring and documented. It's just like Veronica's number one question. I think Lisa or Nicholas is going to tell you, you can keep a list, but you can't keep a copy of the card, right? And so we don't do that, but we can prove somebody's been vaccinated. And that's probably the number one thing I get on that whole HIPAA complex, and we can go into that more in depth if somebody doesn't understand that. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the employee market out there. Obviously, how are we doing on time? Yep, we're only at almost 40 minutes. We're good. The employer market right now is tough, really, really tough. Finding employees, and it is true. I will tell you, if you have a vaccination policy, you will be eliminating a portion of the workforce. But I will tell you I've had numerous instances where I tell somebody I can get them a good good paying long-term job. If they just get vaccinated, they've gone and gotten vaccinated. So it does work. But I have had instances, I'd probably say it's about 50-50, where the person said, no, I'm not going to get vaccinated. And we have to find somebody else, right? So that will affect your workforce. But what's really affecting your workforce the most is, if you look at it right now, the California workforce market is down 400,000 people from where it was before the COVID event happened. And at the point in time when the COVID event happened, we were at the lowest unemployment we had in many, many decades. So, and now we lost 400,000 of those people. And what that means is that there's 400,000 less people looking for work that were also available for us to employ back then. So it's just a really, really tight market. People are afraid to jump jobs because of COVID. So the people that would normally be circulating in the market are not circulating in the market. Obviously, vaccine mandates make people fearful. The childcare situation is making finding the number of women that can go back to work is very difficult for them. So there's just a lot of challenges in the market, but it's real for everyone. So you're on this call and you're having trouble finding employees. It is very real. There's a lot of fear still. A lot of people, like I said, there's 400,000 less people in California looking for work than were looking for work before COVID. So that's about all I have. Because they covered a lot of the, Cal OSHA, CDC, and and create a plan. And but I do, I'm happy to talk about the real application if anybody has a question. Thanks, Tanya.
I love that. So I want to thank each of you for sharing your wealth of knowledge. Let's go ahead and get started with our Q&A because I do see that folks have some questions. And remember, go ahead, you can put it down in the Q&A section right at the bottom of your screen. I want to circle back first to Veronica's inquiry. Would you mind restating that question that you had? And it sounded like it was kind of open for the rest of the panel. I think it's important that we all tap in. So take it away, Ms. Veronica.
Sure. So my question is, how do we handle when we have repeat customers? Not so much staff, because staff, we may be keeping our own record, aware of whether or not they're vaccinated. I think repeat customers who were not taking record for their cards, we're just having them show it to us. So, and if there's different staff members in the front, or if they visit different of our offices and they say, I already showed this to someone, I don't have it with me today. How do we handle those situations?
And any of you can go ahead and jump in on this. You can be specific to your workplace or any situation that you are familiar with.
So I'll jump in and then feel free if any of you guys have different thoughts. I did want to get to Larry's point about HIPAA too, but it is, I think it's a different situation if you're one of those businesses that are required to check vaccine cards, like the bars, et cetera, because then there's LA County guidance that says that you need to check the vaccine card and the ID, and there's a protocol for doing that. So in that case, you really can't deviate. Personally, I would recommend not deviating from that guidance because, again, we have so many rules all over the place. And so you want to follow what we have in place. And if somebody says, hey, you didn't check that person, then you would at least have a way to say, but we followed the LA County protocol for it. I think that as Don said, when you have rules, the risk comes up when it's not applied consistently. And so it might be hard, like someone's going to say, oh, you remember me, I was here last week. Oh yeah, my friend was with me too. And then it's hard to know whether or not that friend was really there and to know the person who's checking. I just think it's personally, from a legal standpoint, better to just make sure that you check and tell the person, sorry, that's our policy. Then you're not going to have arguments. You're not going to put the person at the door in the situation of having to have that.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think there should be definite signage that illustrates that.
And I could be wrong.
One other thing I'll point out is that there are apps available to allow you to store it digitally on your phone. And it seems to me, who goes out without their phone anymore? Who shows up anywhere without a phone? So maybe just educate your customers that, hey, why don't you just take a picture or get that thing in your Apple Wallet or one of these apps, and that way you always have it. And we're educating customers at the same time, kind of trying to diffuse a difficult situation.
Larry?
And I am aware of organizations that keep a list, but it's only practical in a limited environment. In other words, where you're not dealing with the public that wanders in. Organizations that have like for membership, once they've shown once, they don't keep the card again. They just say they've shown us proof of vaccination, check. And then they keep that on a separate disk where no government, just in case the rule changes, right? So.
I like that. I think if we add a column to like the check-in software, if we have it, I know for us, because we're co-located with EDD, we do have something where we're constantly having to check in individuals. But I think it's as simple as adding a column in our software, our check-in software, just to be able to say that they've shown proof, that we don't have to keep record, but that they've shown it.
Right. So it's been confirmed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right. And Larry, I get those questions too on HIPAA. At the beginning, people were thinking they couldn't ask their employees if they were vaccinated because that was HIPAA. And
Nope.
so again, it's kind of a yes, no. But as far as maintaining that information, that's where you got to be really careful as who has access to it. And even if you have a list, a yes, no list, I would be really careful about making sure that it was secure and who had access.
Right.
Mhm.
Private, keeping it private, yes.
Yeah, I have a
But
question.
for an organization that's having meetings, for example, and every time you have a meeting, you don't want to have to prove, you could keep a list, for example.
Which is, yeah, we keep a list for our in-house staff and a copy of their card for all in-house staff, only not visitors.
Great. I have a question for Veronica. Are the rules for COVID preparedness documents different for small businesses than for large?
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat that question?
Are the rules for COVID preparedness documents different for small businesses than for large or enterprise size businesses? Do the rules change based on the size of the business?
I would say not, but I think that would probably be more of a Lisa question.
Yeah, with me or Nick, with the pending legislation, it'll change for those who are over 100 if it actually goes through and gets implemented. But otherwise, no, unless you have one employee, then you might not be subject to the state ETS, but otherwise size won't matter. But the vaccine mandate that's pending may impact employers of 100 or more if it gets there.
And then there's also a practical effect of if you have 5 people and you work in an office environment, you're likely to be able to comply with all the ETS guidance and avoid any trouble with Cal OSHA because everybody's got their own office or they can be very spaced out or half the people work from home, things like that.
Great. So I have another question, and this may vary also, but knowing that vaccines can weaken, can employers require booster shots?
So that actually hasn't been addressed yet. And right now, I think everybody's still busy trying to figure out if they're going to require the vaccine in the first place. But I see that in the future because I think there's going to be a point at which they're going to say that, a 2-year-old vaccine doesn't cut it.
Yeah, you'll as with a lot of these things, I imagine you'll probably see the healthcare industry kind of on the forefront of these, especially since a lot of them started getting vaccinated a year ago. So, you kind of be on the lookout for them and they'll probably be on the vanguard of, additional vaccine requirements.
Great. Another question from Don Zerlup. On the slides, it was called guidance, but your verbal explanations call them requirements. Which one is it? Is it guidance or requirements? And who enforces the requirements outside of the business? What are the penalties for non-compliance?
So I think that refers to our slides. I think that's us trying to mix up the language a little bit. If it's from the county and it applies to you, it's a requirement. We're calling it guidance because that's kind of, there's best practices that you may also get from the county, but things about like the mask mandate, that's obviously required. It's a statute that you have to give the notice if you've had an exposure at the workplace within a day. It's required that you do a COVID prevention plan and that kind of thing. I have heard of the County Department of Health coming to businesses to examine. There were some gyms, I think, that were looked into, some in the South Bay because of potential concern. So that would be where you'd see mandates, where you'd see enforcement. Penalties, I'm sure there are statutory penalties. I don't know them off the top of my head.
There are definitely some fines, and then also as you have the Cal OSHA, they have their additional way of citations and fines and things like that as well.
And you definitely want to keep up with the LA Department of Public Health websites for any signage or new implementing rules that they're going to look for once they come out, if they do come out to your site.
And there's actually just there's a Cal OSHA actually has they have a list of I don't know how updated it is, but Cal OSHA citations for COVID-19 related violations. So there's none of them are incredibly large, but the most recent one was to Kaiser Permanente in Victorville, and they got a $24,000 penalty proposed. So still something a business, I'm sure, especially a small business, is not keen on getting. So.
Right.
Okay. Another question: how do you handle natural immunity based upon recovering from COVID? So if someone is recovering and maybe they feel like they do or don't have to get the shot, what are your thoughts on that? And how do you handle those that think natural immunity is based on recovery from COVID?
I'm
He's
happy
asking
to-
legally. Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. If you someone else want to take that? I don't.
I thought your slide said 90 days. Isn't that right, Lisa?
So that's what the ETS gave as an outlined number, like a 90 days, and you consider to have the natural immunity. It's a 14-day, I believe, window after you have it before you're, actually, it might have been changed to 10 before you can return to work if you're asymptomatic. So there's different rules, and these rules change. So it's something that you do want to check if you have somebody who's been out with COVID and saying, I need to come back, it's day number 10, whether or not it's 10 is okay. They need to be asymptomatic at that point as well. But with respect to, having had COVID, I've had some people who have dealt with that. Somebody said, oh, I had it right at the beginning of the pandemic, I don't have to get vaccinated. And that isn't the answer. And it doesn't, it depends on how sick they were. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but whether or not they would still have it. I have not had people who have been using that as an excuse to being vaccinated. So if someone is coming back from having had COVID outside of that 90-day window, they're being treated as unvaccinated if they're not.
Yeah, and it seemed like a year and 3, last spring it seemed like maybe you could take a test that would show that you had the antibodies before there was a vaccination, before there was a vaccine, right? But it doesn't seem that that type of kind of proof of immunity, as it were, is being allowed. So it doesn't particularly matter especially once you're past the 90 days, which is the current guidance or requirements, as it were.
Okay. Are there any other questions out there? And if not, let's go ahead and wrap up with final thoughts. Larry, we can get started with you.
Well, just the practical application of COVID is just don't stress about it too much. Do the right thing, follow the guidance. That's from a business point of view, what you can do. I mean, if you follow the CDC guidance, if you follow the county, city, and state guidance, your likelihood of coming into trouble with a lawyer, for example, is very, very low. It's never zero. But the real application is if you do these things, it works. Like I said, we have hundreds of people working all the time, and none of them have got COVID at work. I know that some places have had a problem, and the media loves to jump on it. But in the practical world, very few of my clients have gotten COVID problems at work if they follow these guidelines. So that's what I would say to people.
I do actually have one more question. I'm sorry, it just came in. Can you require unvaccinated employees to pay for testing?
So that's actually a sticking point in California because most states don't require that as a business expense. So the current thought is, and this is actually still kind of up, we're not quite sure because we don't have Cal OSHA's guidance. But if we have the situation where you have to either be vaccinated or testing every week, the thought is you're going to probably have to prepare to pay for that. California is trying to ramp up the idea of like having a whole bunch of home tests and things that are available. So you can say, okay, your employee, you're going home, take this test and bring it back with the result if it's negative tomorrow, or let us know if it's positive. So we're not quite sure, but on the safe side, I would anticipate you likely have to pay for it.
Mhm. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. My follow-up on that is though, you could just not allow testing and then you wouldn't have to pay for it. Right? Is that, in other words, if you could have a policy that if you have a vaccination, you just don't allow that. So like if Cal OSHA makes you pay for the testing and you don't want to, then just don't allow it. Is that correct?
You could have an only vaccinated policy.
That's what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
In other words, if they make us pay for the test, me as a small business owner, I would say, okay, then you can't do that. I'm not gonna pay for it. So you're fired, basically. Get vaccinated or you're not employed anymore.
Right. Yeah. There are the county has a number of like free testing sites, so you can send them to those places.
Right.
But the problem then you run into is that, oh, well, you have to pay them for the time to travel over there. And so it's very complicated, unfortunately. So
just don't allow
the vaccination policy, it's a lot easier, that's for sure. So.
Right.
If the state makes you pay for it, then I'm a small business. We're not going to do it. Yeah.
So going back.
Sorry.
That's okay. Going back to the final thoughts, I guess for me, I wanted to kind of extend myself if there's any input that I can offer. I'd be happy to answer any questions away from this meeting. I did want to add, as I noted to myself, but I didn't mention earlier, that anytime we give any type of cleaning supplies, because it seems to be what's most popular around here lately is a constant need of supplies. We want to make sure that whatever we're purchasing, whatever we're supplying our staff with, that we have safety data sheets for everything, and that we keep consistent on updating that information and making it available, because we have several staff that have different types of allergies, and that we're training them on how to use those supplies as well properly with gloves, and and how to transport them if you're transporting them from a bigger gallon to a smaller spray bottle.
Thank you for that. Lisa?
I would just reinforce that checking and with the LA County, the DPH website is good. The California one, OSHA, is good. Making sure that you're on top of what the current requirements are before you go try to enforce them when you have a situation with an employee who's raising an issue.
Thank you for that. Nicholas?
Yeah, I would just, I would want to reinforce one of Don's points, which is just, consistency in your policies. The more consistent you are, the better off you're going to be if you do end up having Cal OSHA or the county breathing down your neck, or an employee threatening a lawsuit.
Thank you, Nicholas. Don?
Yeah, so I'll just reiterate the three main points that I made earlier. Make sure you get your policy right. Get the aid of experts like the panelists you've heard from today, the Cal OSHA website and other sites. Make sure first you got a policy right. Secondly, make sure you train everybody in your workplace on what that policy says and what they're required to do. And thirdly, enforce it fairly. And if everybody's well trained, hopefully the enforcement will be the least of your problems, because people are going to do the right thing. So, and obviously, like everyone else said, stay tuned. this thing keeps changing every 24 hours. So whatever we said today could be obsolete next week. Just keep aware of what's going on in your industry.
One thing I think is very clear about what all of you had to say is the fairness of it. Be consistent and enforce it fairly. Nothing has been fair about this whole COVID experience that we've all gone through. However, the way we deal with it, the way we handle our employees, our clients, and our customers is what really matters. So I want to thank each of you for showing up today, sharing your knowledge, and sharing the time with our members here at the Redondo Beach Chamber of Commerce. Again, I want to thank you. Know that we are always here at the Economic Development Committee to bring to you information and opportunities that will enrich our business community. If you have any questions, please email the chamber. Follow up with these professionals. If you have any further questions, they are happy, obviously, to help make sure that the process is as seamless for you as possible and painless. But again, thank you for being here, and we absolutely look forward to continuing to serve you here at the Redondo Beach Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much.